Where do you start with Alpine? They have descended into complete chaos. If you thought things were bad on the track, it turns out they are even worse off it. As during the Belgian Grand Prix weekend, we got the announcement of a major management exodus that involved the departures of 3 senior figures in the Alpine F1 team, in response to what can only be described as an awful start to the 2023 season. On Friday at Spa, Alpine confirmed that they departed company with team principal Otmar Szafnauer, sporting director Alain Permain and chief technical officer Pat Fry, while CEO Laurent Rossi has been moved aside from his position, and all of these moves have happened within just a span of 8 days. So what the hell is going on at Alpine, and why have they decided to make such wholesale changes at this point in the year? Well, the main reason has to be their performances on track, because so far this season Alpine just has not lived up to their expectations that they had before the start of the season, when they were talking up trying to fight the top 3 teams, Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull. Instead, they are way off the pace of the front runners, sitting a lonely 6th in the World Championship, and just have the one podium finish to their name. But it's not just the lack of results, it's also the fact that Alpine has been leapfrogged by the likes of Aston Martin and McLaren since the end of last year. You have to remember that Aston Martin made the most gains over the winter, to the point where they started the season as Red Bull's closest challengers, while McLaren, like Alpine, started off the season slowly, but since then they've made incredible progress by bringing huge developments to their car, which now sees them fighting at the front of the field. So while both Aston Martin and McLaren went through periods during the season where they were consistently delivering, this has been the opposite of what has been happening at Alpine. Their form has been patchy and inconsistent. One weekend they're on the pace, one weekend they're nowhere. And it's a complete reversal of what happened in 2022 when they finished P4 in the Constructors' Championship through being consistently in the points. If you cast your minds back to Miami, you remember that was when Laurent Rossi gave Alpine a bit of a public bashing, calling out their form as amateurish and basically giving them the hurry up to improve their performances. And initially it did have the desired effect, because they went to the next race in Monaco and finished on the podium. It seemed as though they had turned a corner. But since then, everything has unravelled back to where they were at the start of the year. They are making constant developments with the car, and yet they are getting nowhere. They're not getting the results that they set out to achieve. So I think that it's pretty clear that Alpine is falling behind its rivals and is lacking in progression. So let's look at each departure in a little bit more detail, starting with team principal Otmar Szafnauer. Otmar joined Alpine at the start of 2022 from Aston Martin, where he'd been since 2009, when of course it was previously Force India and then Racing Point. And he was effectively brought in to sort of steer the ship in the right direction. But after just 18 months, he has been let go. His departure is mostly down to the fact that he had a difference of opinion with Alpine's hierarchy over when it would be able to achieve certain long-term targets. But I also think there were situations that he himself mishandled, such as Fernando Alonso's contract that had looked set to be signed last summer, until Aston Martin was allowed to swoop in and steal Alonso from behind Alpine's back. The next departure, and the one that I actually think makes the least amount of sense, is Alain Permain, Alpine's sporting director, who has been at the team since 1989. He is Entstone through and through. He has been there through all of the guises, starting out at Benetton, through the championship years with Michael Schumacher, then with Renault and the championship years with Fernando Alonso, then through Lotus, then when it became Renault again, and then finally at Alpine. And of course Alain has worked his way up through the ranks of the team, initially beginning as an engineer. I personally remember him in the early 2000s being race engineer to Jarno Trulli and then Giancarlo Fisichella, and obviously since then he has continued to work his way up the management ladder to where he is today. But going back to my original point, as I said, I just cannot fathom why Alpine would part company with Alain, because he is so highly respected inside the team and he brings so many good qualities, particularly his experience. So it's no surprise that he's been linked with moves to Red Bull and the FIA already after his departure. I personally would like to see him join the FIA and become the new race director. I think he'd fit into that role perfectly. The next key departure is their chief technical officer Pat Fry, who was left to join Williams in the same role. But I think that this decision wasn't because they decided to split with him. I think it's down to the fact that Pat wanted a new challenge. But nevertheless, it is a major loss to the team, because Pat is such a respected figure. He has obviously carved out a fantastic career. He's worked for the likes of McLaren and Ferrari and been a part of their championship successes. And all of this leads us back to Laurent Rossi, who of course is now no longer Alpine's CEO. He's instead been removed from that position and has taken up another role. But it cannot be understated how much of a part he played in the mess that Alpine currently finds itself in. I think that Laurent's way of working, his management style, hasn't always gone down particularly well with certain people at the team. In particular, Alain Prost, who was previously in an advisory role at Alpine before he was let go at the start of 2022. And recently Alain has come out swinging. He has publicly slated Laurent for the way that he has managed Alpine, effectively blaming him for the culture that he has created and why Alpine has failed so miserably on track. So these wholesale changes all happened within the span of just 8 days, and it has left Alpine's vice president Bruno Famin, who will act as Alpine's interim team principal, to pick up the pieces and try and restore order. Famin actually addressed the media about the changes on the Friday at Spa, and when he was talking about why Alpine had come to the decisions that they had done, it kind of gave off the indication that there is more problems under the surface at Alpine, almost as if everybody is not working in sync, that the environment has become too corporate. If this is indeed the case, then maybe it isn't a surprise that Alpine has lost so many key figures over the past 3 years, dating back to the end of 2020, when it parted company with its former team principal Cyril Abiteboul. Abiteboul was just the first one out of the door, but since then he has been followed by executive director and team principal Marcin Budkowski, Alain Prost, Fernando Alonso, and then Oscar Piastri, who decided to turn down a seat at Alpine in favour of moving to McLaren. And I think that this stems from the fact that Alpine's problems start right at the top of the company and work their way down into the core of the team. They need to be the ones that are putting their hands up first and admitting that there is an unhealthy environment, and this is the reason why so many key people are departing. You also have to question why Alpine put out the announcements on the Friday of the Belgian Grand Prix, because surely it would have made more sense to have them announced on the Thursday on the media day, when the news would have likely have blown over as the weekend progressed. But instead they had all of this unwanted attention and focus on them throughout the weekend, and it looked in a really uncomfortable situation. So Alpine is in a spot above it, but it's not the first time that the team has found itself in a difficult situation and having to overcome it. You think back to 2009 when it was found guilty of manufacturing the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix, Crashgate as it is better known as, and its reputation was obviously in tatters at that point in time, and it had to try and rebuild it and win back the trust of its competitors. And on top of that, you also had 2015 when this time it was Lotus and it was going through financial difficulties, particularly in the middle part of the year. There was even a risk that it wouldn't see out the year. When they arrived at that year's Belgian Grand Prix, the truck was locked up, the bailiffs were out. There was a real chance that Lotus was going to end there and then. So the team did manage to survive both of those situations, but I think this one is a little bit different in the respect that Alpine, I think, has a major rebuild on its hands, and I don't see it being a quick fix. They need to just do away with this 100 race plan that they've set themselves and just focus on putting in a clear structure and a clear plan that is going to allow them to stay with the top teams. It actually wouldn't at all surprise me if bigger changes are looming. I think that the rebrand as Alpine hasn't really worked out, so possibly they could revert back to the Renault name. So it'll be interesting to see how this situation develops over the coming months. One thing is for certain though, is that Alpine is in a big hole and it needs to dig itself out quickly. So what do you guys make of the chaos that is ensuing at Alpine, and what changes do you think that the team need to make? Make sure you let me know your thoughts in the comments. And also don't forget to like this video and to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.